Liberal Viewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 28th edition of Liberal Viewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me and Chong. We will be using the 16 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows and some shows today, for all from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. My main topic, title of the video, is Donald Trump a fascist? That became a big question over this last week or so. I mean, not that it hasn't been in the news for many months and years before that, but his longest serving chief of staff, retired General John Kelley, actually came out and on tape, in a recording, not just in an off-the-record interview, but on tape, said that he thought Trump is the textbook definition of a fascist, admired Hitler's generals, and all sorts of stuff that had been said, like, on background. He should have said it on video, but at least he said it in audio recording, and I actually have political comedy for you on that in terms of the Fox News reaction to it. But then that was all superseded last night. Trump's big rally in Madison Square Garden, they actually had a supposed political comedian opening the entire event, a guy named Tony Hinchcliffe, and he made a couple really bad jokes, and I'm going to show you those and then the Fox News non-reaction to it. But here are like two of the worst jokes that Tony Hinchcliffe made at the Trump rally at Madison Square Garden yesterday. One of these has gotten a lot of play, the Puerto Rican one, but this first one, I don't know if you saw this, but here's the first Tony Hinchcliffe really bad joke at the Trump rally yesterday. Here.
Believe it or not, people, I welcome migrants to the United States of America with open arms. And by open arms, I mean like this. It's wild. And these Latinos, they love making babies, too. Just know that. They do. They do. There's no pulling out. They don't do that. They come inside, just like they did to our country. Republicans are the party with a good sense of humor.
Republican, now that's a joke. Republicans are the party with a good sense of humor. I mean, if that's the joke they think it, I mean, that was pretty racist, bigoted, and that's one of the hallmarks of fascism, by the way, is not only is there like dictatorial centralized power, there's intolerance of opposition, and there's usually some sort of like racial or ethnic supremacy with dehumanizing or downgrading someone else's ethnicity or race or whatever. That's all part of fascism. And here's the second joke that I think got a lot more play over in this clip.
You know, there's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico. Okay, all right. Okay, we're getting there.
Are we getting there? I mean, is that really in like the final 10 days of the election? Trump wants to have that guy at his rally? I mean, there are Puerto Ricans. There was actually a big Puerto Rican backlash to that last so-called joke there. And what was really odd, or not odd, but typical, I guess, for Fox News, because it's a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, they spent a lot of time reporting on Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden. Almost no mention of the controversy that came out of it. In fact, their first supposedly straight news program in the morning, America's Newsroom, with Bill Hemmer and Dana Perino, there was, in the entire 2-hour program, there was absolutely no mention of that joke or those jokes or Tony Hinchcliffe or any of the controversy about it, except for this really brief sort of tangential reference by Dana Perino over
Another
here.
reason could be, call for number 3, please. This is Trump chipping away at the Democrats' hold on some longtime voting blocs. Blacks, with Harris, she's down 13. Hispanics, she's down 18. Jewish voters, she's down 8. And here, even in New York, as we mentioned, she's down 10. And just looking at this, people can look at the rally last night and have different opinions about it, right? And say, like, why'd you need the comedian? Okay, didn't need that, like, unforced error. But I feel like tactically the Trump campaign keeps beating her campaign to the ball. And I think these voters in these different groups are starting to notice that. And when you look back on Election Day, when we have you back to do analysis on no matter how it goes, I mean, no matter what, that is a change of ideological and other types of diversity for the Republican Party going forward.
So yeah, the comedian who was an unforced error, but if you weren't watching like other news, like the regular news sites, you wouldn't even know what she was talking about. That was the only, and they basically tried to downplay, just like they also tried to like downplay and then like explain away the whole comment from the comments that came up from people who used to work with Donald Trump about him being a fascist, about him praising Hitler's generals. He wished his generals would listen like Hitler's generals did. In fact, one of the worst ways that was rationalized was the guy we used to call the brown-haired guy who's not Steve Doocy on Fox and Friends. I guess I can call him Brian Kilmeade for once, but he tried to explain it. And the thing is, this was kind of the context of this remark. I saw this clip played a bunch of times, but it was taken kind of out of context. But the context really makes it worse, because what he's saying is that Trump's generals wouldn't follow his illegal orders. And he wishes, and of course that would, frustrate him and make him wish he had have had Hitler's generals, the German generals, because of course the German generals were famous for just following orders. That was like the defense after World War II of Hitler's generals. And that defense didn't work because the military officers have a duty not to follow illegal orders. So that's actually like the second level of terribleness from what Brian Kilmeade said over on Fox and Friends over here.
And then he obviously has frustration. And I could absolutely see him go, now, you know what? It would be great to have German generals that actually do what we asked them to do, knowing that's a third, maybe not fully being cognizant of the third rail of German generals who are Nazis and whatever. But
German generals were Nazis, whatever. That's the third. He wasn't cognizant that German generals were Nazis, and that's like a third rail. Nazis are bad is like a third rail of American politics. I mean, that's kind of crazy. But that clip I saw got a lot of play. But this is the 5th of my 6 political comedy clips. I'm showing you 6 political comedy clips this week. This one actually is a Freudian slip from Kayleigh McEnany, former press secretary for Donald Trump. She was trying to defend him by saying that Mike Pence's chief of staff, who was like the deputy chief of staff to John Kelley, denied what John Kelley said. And that guy's name is Nick Ayers. And actually earlier in the program, she mentioned Nick Ayers, but she had this Freudian slip a little later, did not say Nick Ayers. Over in this clip.
Important. And Harris, I was standing on a tarmac when the losers and suckers story popped. It was in 2020 before an election year. We were given virtually no heads up from the reporter. And within pretty much hours was able to aggregate dozens of people who said, hey, this never happened. Nick Fuentes came out, who was an aide to John Kelley, who said, I never heard anything about losers.
Not Nick Ayers. She said Nick Fuentes. She said Nick Fuentes, who, of course, is a white supremacist anti-Semite who famously had dinner with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. That's like the basically the neo-Nazi who Trump had dinner with at Mar-a-Lago is the Freudian slip of Kayleigh McEnany. She said Nick Fuentes when she meant Nick Ayers. That's right. Nick Fuentes is backing up that Trump didn't call the troop suckers and losers and Hitler's general and liked Hitler's generals. And no, I actually like laughed out loud when I heard her say Nick Fuentes, but no one actually, I think I'm the only one who even noticed she said Nick Fuentes, at least that I've seen online. And then finally, the most ridiculous way they tried to rationalize a way that Trump's former chief of staff, people who worked for him, say that he's like textbook definition of a fascist. They came up with this Friday morning on another one of their supposedly straight news programs. Supposedly straight news anchor John Roberts makes this argument on America Reports Friday on Fox News over here.
So if he's being called a fascist, he's actually in pretty good company, because take a look at this. Every Republican presidential candidate since Barry Goldwater in 1964 has been called a fascist. That includes Goldwater, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, for Pete's sake, Trump, Dick Cheney, Ron DeSantis, Scott Walker. I mean, Richard, this is like a go-to thing that seems to mean nothing except throw fear into the hearts of voters.
People who've been called fascist. What does that even mean? Is that even a fact? I mean, who called them Is it this like people who've been called fascists by their rebellious teenage children? Or, I mean, it doesn't say who called them fascist. And, you know, I actually remember back in the George W. Bush days that a lot of the people on the left I was working with wanted to call George W. Bush fascist, but I never went that far. I never called him a fascist. I was saving it for Donald Trump, so I feel vindicated at this point on that one. But the other thing that, like, who have been called fascists? Well, all those people on that list you just saw John Roberts talk about, how many of them were called fascists by their former chief of staff, their former Secretary of Defense, their former National Security Advisor, or former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? All those people say fascistic tendencies, dictatorial tendencies. It's all there. And I don't think any of those former Republicans who have been labeled fascist or Hitler, according to Fox News, I don't even know how they compiled that list, like what the evidence they used, who called them, but it wasn't their former staff. It wasn't people who work closely with them for years and are Republican, you know, war hero or gold star fathers like General John Kelley. So anyway, those are my 6 political comedy clips on the main topic, starting with the Tony Hinchcliffe stuff and all the way through the John Roberts telling us, well, everybody calls all Republicans get called fascists, so it doesn't mean anything anymore except to scare voters. But it's covered better in some of the news summaries, and I'm about to show you the news summaries from longest to shortest. The longest one, again, is NBC News Meet the Press, because they have like a really long Steve Kornacki segment that really just tells you that the race is tied. Probably too long, but I'm still going to show you the whole thing. It's like 7 3/4 minutes as the longest news summary of the day that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. The closest presidential contest in modern history is entering its final stretch. And with just 9 days until Election Day, Vice President Harris and former President Trump are making their closing arguments. Trump focused on a message of fear. Harris casting Trump as a threat to the nation's democracy. In a series of interviews with the New York Times, Mr. Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, retired Marine Corps General John Kelley, warned the former president would rule like a dictator in a second term.
I'm looking at the definition of fascism. It's a far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. So certainly, in my experience, those are the kind of things that he thinks would work better in terms of running America. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
Vice President Harris, joined by high-profile surrogates, including Barack and Michelle Obama, is leaning into a closing argument centered on attacking former President Trump as a danger to the country, an approach campaign officials believe will help her win over the small sliver of undecided voters and motivate her base.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I also believe that the people who know him best on this subject should be trusted.
General John Kelley, Donald Trump's former chief of staff said that Trump told him he wanted his generals to be like Hitler's generals. In politics, a good rule of thumb is don't say you want to do anything like Hitler.
All of my hope about Kamala is also accompanied by some genuine fear. Fear for our country, fear for our children, fear for what is coming our way if we forget the stakes in this election.
Former President Trump on defense.
It was phony stories by a general that got fired, and he's a whack job, total whack job, a general. It's funny, when you fire people, see, Biden has never fired anybody, but when you fire people for doing a bad job, they get a little bit angry.
The vice president will deliver a closing argument speech on Tuesday at the Ellipse, where former President Trump spoke shortly before the January 6th Capitol attack. NBC News has learned Harris plans to contrast Mr. Trump's worst moment in office and what a second Trump term would look like with what her campaign calls Harris's optimistic vision for the future. On Saturday, former First Lady Michelle Obama appealed to American men, focusing on the issue of reproductive rights.
If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage.
For his part, former President Trump will use a rally tonight at Madison Square Garden to deliver his closing argument.
We'll stop the invasion of criminals into our country, and I will bring back the American dream for your children and for yourself. This is all you need to know. Kamala broke it. I will fix it.
For more on where the race stands and just who the voters are that the campaigns may still be able to persuade, I'm joined by national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Steve, this race is incredibly tight in the home stretch.
Yeah, absolutely, Kristen. One thing we have noticed in the last couple of days, this is not all of the polls that are out there now, but we have seen a number, 4 in the last 4 days, that have shown very small, but in the context of this close race, potentially meaningful movement in Trump's direction. I don't want to overstate it, but at the same time, it's hard to ignore these 4. The CNBC poll came out the other day, has Trump ahead by 2. The Wall Street Journal poll, Trump ahead by 3. These are national numbers. Siena and the New York Times, a tied race. CNN, a tied race. The significance here is broader movement. Again, we're seeing in Trump's direction. To put this in some context, here is our current national polling average. Let me call that up on the screen for you right here. Harris continues to lead nationally. I want to stress that, but we've been tracking this every week on the air here. A couple weeks ago, this number was at 3 for Kamala Harris. Her lead in the poll average now down to 1.2 because of some of the numbers that I just showed you. Of course, the swing states, the battleground states are going to be what decide this election. And look how close those are. We see 1.2 nationally. Just about all these swing states are even tighter than that. So Trump certainly a little improvement nationally, but where the race is decided, absolutely razor thin. But what is happening nationally? Well, we can show you from the CNBC poll. They picked up on something that our own NBC poll was suggesting recently, and that is a shift in the image of Kamala Harris. You can see right now in the CNBC poll, 42 positive, 48 negative, higher negative than positive. That's where Trump is too, largely 39, 49. The significance is about a month ago when we were polling this, Harris had a higher positive than negative. In our poll, in the CNBC poll, in other polls out there right now, you see Harris now with that negative going back above that positive rating. That said, tons of uncertainty and volatility remain in this race. Check this out. We can show you this morning also from that CNBC poll, looking at this question of persuadable voters, defining them this way. How about this? 12% in the CNBC poll who currently say they support Harris or Trump say that they could change their mind still in this race. Another 6% say they're undecided or currently going to vote for a third-party candidate. That's a persuadable category of 18%. That's getting close to 1 in 5 voters here. And the uncertainty is particularly acute for Donald Trump. We tell you maybe he's made some gains here, but his support continues to run deepest with voters who it is unclear if they're actually going to turn out and vote. Look at it this way. From our NBC polling, a merge of all of our data, those who voted in the 2020 presidential election and the 2022 midterms, Harris with a 6-point lead, the most reliable block of voters. Those who only voted in the 2020 presidential, that's where Trump opens up a lead. And then those who didn't vote in either, that's where Trump has his biggest advantage over Harris. Are they actually going to vote this time around? Huge question mark. Another way to look at it, we ask folks, scale of 1 to 10, your interest in this election. Again, look at this. Those who rate it the highest, 9 or 10, races tied, 7 or 8, pretty high. Harris is ahead. Here's where Trump cleans up. Those who say 1 to 6. So again, Trump relying on a coalition that, if they turn out, could be powerful for him, Kristen, but that's a big if.
Powerful indeed, and those persuadable voters in focus in these final days of the race. Steve Kornacki, great stuff as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kristen.
On Saturday, I sat down with Republican vice presidential nominee Senator JD Vance.
And I will have a couple clips of JD Vance responding to this whole fascism thing, and 2 clips of JD Vance, 1 clip of Lindsey Graham, and a Liz Cheney in there, and a Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio was on Fox News Sunday, so it's definitely the light version of the fascism question. And like I said, I think that Steve Kornacki segment was too long. It was like half. The news summary from Kristen Welker at the beginning I thought was good, and especially playing that whole audio from John Kelley. That's what the big news of the week was, because John Kelley has said some of those things before where he's been quoted, but he hasn't said it on camera, finally said it on tape or whatever for the New York Times. But I wish he would say it on camera, that put it in an ad if you really think that one of the people who's like a coin flip away from the presidency is, admired Hitler and has textbook definition of fascism. I really like that, going through the textbook definition of fascism there. He was like reading right out of like Merriam-Webster, I think. That was I didn't put that in the video description, but I usually like to use this one website, the One Look website, because you get like dozens of dictionaries that you can compare. Here, I'll put that in the live comments for the live viewers. Here's the like dozens of dictionaries defining fascism, and I think the Merriam-Webster one was the one that you saw Jon Kelley reading, and he was Trump's chief of staff, and that was important to play that whole audio. None of it, in fact, none of that makes it into the Fox News Sunday news summary, where you have Shannon Bream giving her like headlines of the week. They're like 2 cats having a little, hopefully they won't knock over the camera, because they're like right behind the camera there. I don't know if you can hear that, but they're distracting me here. So I should probably get the clip going so I can deal with both Cheech and Chong, the cats here. This is the Fox News Sunday news summary. No playing of the John Kelley audio. I don't think they even mentioned the John Kelley story. It's Shannon Bream, and then Peter Doocy covering the Harris campaign, and Alexis McAdams covering Peter Doocy in Philadelphia, Alexis McAdams in New York City covering the 2 campaigns. Over in the second longest news summary, and of course the most biased, over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. We begin with a look at your headlines. Israeli police are investigating what is suspected to be a deliberate ramming attack by a truck at a bus stop north of Tel Aviv, injuring several civilians. As the Israeli military continues strikes against militants in Gaza and Lebanon, and after its strikes on Iran early Saturday. The LA Dodgers continued their winning streak against the New York Yankees in Game 2 of the World Series last night with a 4-2 win in their hometown. Game 3 is set for Monday at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. And the U.S. is not the only country with a nail-biter election. Japanese voters go to the polls today for parliamentary elections that could throw out the prime minister's ruling party in the lower chamber, which has held power for all but 4 of the years since 1955. In a moment, we will talk with Senator Marco Rubio, who's been campaigning with former President Trump this week. And later, we'll be joined by Harris Walz surrogate, Colorado Governor Jared Polis. But first, let's get team coverage from the trail with Alexis McAdams at Madison Square Garden in New York, where former President Trump is set to rally today And senior White House correspondent Peter Doocy, covering Vice President Kamala Harris, set to rally supporters in Philadelphia. Peter, we started off with you.
Shannon, there was a very specific group targeted by the Democrats' top surrogate, men. Michelle Obama's message to them in her campaign trail debut was that she thinks reproductive rights could affect them as much as they affect anybody else.
I got to ask myself, well, why on earth is this race even close? Your girlfriend could be the one in legal jeopardy if she needs a pill from out of state or overseas. Your wife or mother could be the ones at higher risk of dying from undiagnosed cervical cancer because they have no access to regular gynecological care. It will affect you and your sons.
So the closing argument for the Harris-Walz ticket is that Donald Trump is a threat to abortion access and that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And sensitive to criticisms that people don't know her well enough yet, the VP is once again going back to emphasizing her experience as a prosecutor to make her latest anti-Trump appeal.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators, fraudsters, and repeat offenders. I took them on, and I won. Well, Michigan, in 10 days, it's Donald Trump's turn.
The vice president and her top advisors are betting that undecided voters want to hear more about January 6th. So her big event this week is going to be remarks on the ellipse in Washington, D.C., where Donald Trump spoke almost 4 years ago. Shannon.
All right, Peter Doocy in Philadelphia. Thank you, Peter. We turn now to Alexis McAdams at Madison Square Garden in New York. That is where President Trump's going to make a big closing message to voters who've been lined up, it sounds like, for hours, Alexis.
Hey, Shannon. Yeah, people slept here in front of Madison Square Garden, if you can believe it, overnight in New York City, as the former president is going to be in the Big Apple. This time he's not here for a court hearing. This time he's going to be on stage at Madison Square Garden. And I want to show you right now what's going on behind me. This is the look in front of MSG. You can see the crowd is growing here as people get excited for this. The campaign's expecting Madison Square Garden to be full. Tesla CEO Elon Musk will be here. Senator JD Vance and House Speaker Mike Johnson up on stage, just some of the guests, as nearly 20,000 people are expected to pack the world's most iconic arena in deep blue New York City. So this is going to be Trump's third event in New York State, okay? Back in May, he was out in the Bronx. We remember that. And just last month, 16,000 people packed into a rally out on Long Island. The former president says he is going to make a play to win New York, but he has lost the state in the last two elections by more than 20 points. A Republican presidential candidate has not won New York since Ronald Reagan in '84, but new polls show Trump is rating better here than he did last election.
We've had a lot of rallies, and we're going to have our biggest of all at Madison Square Garden. We're going to make a play for New York. Hasn't been one in many, many decades, but with what's going on in New York between the illegal migrants and the crime they're causing and hurting people so badly and all of the problems in New York, we're going to give it a hell of a shot.
On Saturday, former President Trump spending the day in the swing state of Pennsylvania. He was at Penn State last night in two rallies in Michigan, touting his plan for the economy, promising to revive large cities that he says are on the decline, like Philly and Detroit.
We will bring back our manufacturing jobs, our energy jobs, our coal jobs, our steel jobs, and we're going to bring back our dreams. Starting in January, we will give our companies the lowest taxes, the lowest energy costs, the lowest regulatory burdens, and free access to the best and biggest market on the planet.
Okay, so 9 days, if you can believe it, Shannon, until the presidential election. People here are excited and plan to hit the polls. We know that immigration and the economy is a huge issue, not just here for New Yorkers, but across the country. The former president also has a major campaign schedule packed where he's going to then leave New York after Madison Square Garden and head to areas like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Shannon.
Those are the places. All right, Alexis McAdams from New York. Thank you so much. Joining us now, Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio.
So, yeah, there you saw the whole news coverage from Shannon Bream, Peter Doocy, Alexis McAdams about the campaign. No mention of John Kelley. There was like a brief mention, Peter Doocy, like somewhere during his report said that Kamala Harris is claiming that Trump is a threat to democracy, but never anything about why or any of the evidence or those specific. You saw a whole much better coverage on the first half of that NBC News Meet the Press news summary, where they showed the John Kelley audio. They showed Barack Obama talking about him being his former chief of staff and saying he liked Hitler, and that's something you should know is what Hitler did was not good, or whatever was in that clip from the. But anyway, none of that made it into the Fox News Sunday news summary. They do briefly ask Marco Rubio about it in the clip I'll show you after the news summaries. That'll be clip 12. By the way, down in the video description under Media Mentioned, I have short summaries of all 16 clips. We are about to go to clip 8. About to go to clip 9. That was clip 8. And also, I have the under sources, the sources of all my clips, pretty much. And I think ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos is now available free on the ABC News YouTube channel. So I've added that into the links down there. But ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos is the next news summary. Much better, of course, than what you just saw from Fox News Sunday. It's a little bit more like the NBC News Meet the Press one, because it starts off with Jon Karl giving a news summary about what happened in the week, including the John Kelley audio, the textbook definition of fascism. Trump's longest-serving chief of staff saying that he fits the textbook definition of fascism. But then that's followed by a talk about the polls with Rick Klein, their political director, and they have a new ABC Ipsos poll that actually is one of the best polls for Kamala Harris I've seen in a while, especially the what they call the crosstabs, the demographic numbers you'll see. So that's definitely worth watching. I hope that Cheech does not knock over the camera here while I'll try to move. Both the cats are making trouble here while we watch the clips together. Here's the ABC News Summary. Jon Karl doing a much better job than Fox News Sunday, and then Rick Klein with a better news poll than you saw from Steve Kornacki on NBC over here.
Good morning. Welcome to This Week. For most of us, Election Day is already here. Virtually all of us live in places where you don't have to wait till November 5th to cast your ballot. More than 40 million Americans have already voted. This morning, we're going to talk about where the race stands, who's up in the polls, who's down, the tactics the candidates are using to convince undecided voters and to get their supporters to turn out. But this isn't a sporting event. This is about much more than tactics or polls. If there is one thing both sides agree on, it's that America is making a choice that will say a great deal about what kind of a nation we are and what kind of a nation we may become. 4 years ago, Donald Trump became the first president in American history to refuse to accept the results of a presidential election and to do everything in his power to try to overturn the will of the people. It was an effort that continued even after he left the White House. This time, Trump once again seems to be making it clear he won't accept the results if he loses. But he might not have to. Donald Trump has a very good chance of winning this election. He might even be, at this moment, the front runner. This even after his former chief of staff issued a stark warning this week that Trump wants to rule as a dictator, that he meets the textbook definition of a fascist. Once again, this is not a normal campaign. But precisely because the stakes are so high, let's bring in our political director and Washington bureau chief, Rick Klein, to help us understand where the race stands now. Rick?
Yeah, John, right now this race looks as close as it actually was in 2016 and 2020, which is to say it is basically a toss-up. And if you look at the 538 battleground state polling, you see some momentum for Trump in some of the key battlegrounds, but all of these numbers within a point or 2 points, well within polling margins of error. And it means we truly don't know who's going to win on election night. But as you mentioned, some 40 million Americans have already voted early. We, of course, don't know who they voted for quite yet, but far more Republicans are voting early this time than voted early last time. Donald Trump has changed his tune somewhat on that. And, of course, COVID changed a lot of the patterns, so it makes comparisons difficult. But we're seeing some interesting things in the battleground states. In Georgia, turnout is already almost half of what it was in 2020, again, with 9 days left. And check this out. Likely Republicans are actually outpacing likely Democrats in the early voting so far. A huge shift from 4 years ago. But Democrats have a lot more of their voters still on the table. They could still be out there. And in Pennsylvania, we're seeing Democrats basically doubling up on Republicans, a 2-to-1 margin. But that's down from last time as well. One Harris campaign official said, basically, this is not Republicans growing the pie as much as they're starting to eat their pie a little bit earlier. So we're seeing that kind of a shift. Bottom line is, though, we don't know what's going to happen in this race. And so many of the voters we've seen so far are basically people that vote every time. The people that are going to decide this election almost certainly haven't voted yet, John.
Now, we have our new ABC Ipsos poll this morning. It shows Kamala Harris with a slight lead, 4 points nationally. That's within the margin of error. And, of course, Rick, other polls showed it tied or with Trump leading slightly.
Yeah, 51-47 is not a safe lead. In fact, it narrows even tighter if you add in third-party candidates, you add in the battleground state polls. And as you mentioned, other polling out in the last couple of days has this even, maybe Trump up a point or two, or Harris up a point or two. Trump's top issues continue to dominate so much of the conversation. We're seeing in our poll him as viewed as better equipped to handle the economy, better equipped to handle immigration and the border. But we are seeing fewer voters cite inflation as a top issue, and maybe Harris breaking through a bit on that messaging. Harris's top issues, meanwhile, include abortion rights, a big edge for her there, and protecting democracy, an 8-point edge for Harris that plays right into the candidates' closing messages. We have her a big event on Tuesday that is going to hammer that point home.
Now, one thing that caught my eye in a poll, 49% said they believe Donald Trump is a fascist. But 8% of those people said they're going to vote for him anyway.
John, you said it earlier, this is not a normal election in so many ways. We see Harris with an edge on all of these personal attributes, but if it comes down to the issues, it's a different race. John, this is as tight a race as we've seen and as unpredictable a race as I've ever covered.
All right, Rick Klein, thank you very much. Kamala Harris was joined last night in Michigan by former First Lady Michelle Obama. It was her first appearance on the campaign trail since the Democratic convention, and she once again was making her case against Donald Trump.
Can someone tell me why we are once again holding Kamala to a higher standard than her opponent? We expect her to be intelligent and articulate, to have a clear set of policies, to never show too much anger, to prove time and time again that she belongs. But for Trump, we expect nothing at all. No understanding of policy, no ability to put together a coherent argument, no honesty, no decency, no morals. Instead, too many people are willing to write off his childish, mean-spirited antics by saying, well, Trump's just being Trump.
All right, let's bring in top Trump ally, Senator Lindsey Graham.
And I will have a clip of Lindsey Graham later. And I have a Cheech is here. Earlier I showed you Chong. Here we have Cheech, the fluffier cat. He was watching most of that news summary with me. I thought NBC did a better job of giving the details of what John Kelley said, although ABC at least reported it, unlike Fox News in the middle there. But that Rick Klein poll, first of all, from all the polls, one of the things that could happen that I think would be really funny would be Trump could actually win the popular vote, but lose the Electoral College. And then he's going to have to totally switch his position on, well, the Electoral College is so much more difficult. Popular vote would have been so easy, like he did. That's what he said after 2016, for those of us who remember. But that actually could happen, especially because the popular vote is a lot closer than it's been in previous elections, but it's still tied up in all the battleground states. Kamala Harris was winning, blacks and Hispanics and a whole bunch of other important groups in the demographic crosstabs that Rick Klein was talking about. And then there's that one remark that Jon Karl made there that I almost used for the political comedy, where he points out that 49% of the people say they think Trump is fascist, but 8% of those people are voting for him anyway. Could those be the people who decide the election? The low propensity voters that Steve Kornacki was talking about in the previous. Okay, I should probably getting too much fluff. Getting all itchy. Too much fluff. Cheech has too much fluff. That's one of his drawbacks as a cat. But he also likes to be held more than Chong, as you saw. But anyway, I don't want to go off on a cat tangent. I was making the point that the swing voters here could actually be the 8% of the 40. Like, maybe they are. I guess people who like want to vote for someone because they think he's fascist, I guess they would be low propensity voters because they don't really believe in democracy, right? Or I don't know. That's kind of a strange part of that clip that I just wanted to highlight that actually happened, and I've seen that mentioned in a couple other places that there is some small part of the electorate who is voting for Trump because they think he's a fascist, and I find that especially disturbing. But now I'm going to move on to the next news summary, which is really brief in terms of the news that you've seen covered in the rest of the previous three news summaries. Margaret Brennan just basically says the race is tied, and then is promoting Norah O'Donnell's interview with Kamala Harris and shows a clip of her talking about Israeli strikes on Iran. So doesn't really cover the John Kelley stuff, although and the fascism thing never even came up on Face the Nation. I don't know why, but here's the news summary from Margaret Brennan, Norah O'Donnell clip included over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. It is down to the wire in campaign 2024, and this is shaping up to be one of the closest presidential contests in history. Our CBS News poll out this morning shows that Vice President Kamala Harris's edge over Donald Trump is down to just 1 point in the national popular vote. The two candidates are tied in the battleground states collectively, and all those head-to-heads are within the margin of error. We will have more from that poll later on in our broadcast. Candidates are making their final appeals to voters and pushing hard for Americans to get out and vote. But the events of Friday night, when Israel launched its long-awaited retaliatory attack on Iran, are compounding fears of an expanded Mideast conflict. Our Norah O'Donnell spoke with Vice President Harris on the campaign trail yesterday in Michigan and asked her about the Israeli strikes.
Israel launched an attack on Iran that has raised fears of a widening conflict in the Middle East. What is your message to Iran?
Well, first of all, do not respond. It would be a mistake. And we are prepared to defend Israel as we have before. We will again. But the critical point is that there must be a de-escalation in the region. And we are working through diplomatic channels and other channels to ensure that there is a de-escalation in the region.
Is there any indication based on the intelligence that you've seen that Iran wants to respond?
I can't speak to that, but we've been very clear as the United States that they should not respond and that it would be a mistake.
What are the consequences if they do?
I'll keep you posted.
You can watch more of Norah's interview with Vice President Harris tomorrow on CBS Mornings and on the CBS Evening News. While my colleague was in Michigan, we traveled to the battleground state of Pennsylvania and caught up with the Republican who wants to be the next vice president.
And actually, I only took 2 of the 3 possible JD Vance clips because he was actually on 3 of the programs. Instead of JD Vance from Face the Nation, I have Liz Cheney responding to JD Vance attacking the Cheney family. And that's actually the final Newsmaker clip, clip 16, if you're following along in the clip list in the video description, which, as I said last week, I don't think anyone follows along on the clip list, but it's there anyway. But that news summary seemed biased in terms of, all media has a bias towards promoting their exclusive content, and I don't think that clip from Kamala Harris was newsworthy enough to preempt reporting on the news you saw covered in the other news outlets other than Fox News. There was nothing about John Kelley or fascism, like I said, in the whole Face the Nation program. But it was pretty short, so I guess you can give them a little latitude on that. The shortest one was CNN State of the Union. Jake Tapper briefly alludes to the Trump campaign having to confront what some former Trump officials say Trump will do in a second term. The ones who constrained him in the first term, that's one of the, I hear arguments sometimes like, well, if Trump's such a fascist, why wasn't he a fascist in his first term? And he did several fascistic things in his first term, but he also had a lot of guardrails like attorney generals and John Kelley, the chief of staff, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, and that's one of the things I was talking about before, that like some of his orders were not carried out because they were illegal or improper, or he didn't have the authority, or anyway, although that could be a much worse situation now that there's the whole Supreme Court immunity case where like it's like what Nixon used to say, if the president does it, it means it's not illegal. Isn't that what he told David Frost in that famous interview? But anyway, talk about going off on tangents. I have one more news summary I was going to show you, and it's CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper briefly talking about Trump confronting what the former officials say he's going to do in office. Harris talking about abortion, and Michelle Obama on the campaign trail. And I think the one other thing, Trump calling the U.S. a garbage can, all in less than a minute over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is in the single digits, meaning it is only 9 days until Election Day. And the candidates are pressing their case for every undecided or persuadable voter out there in a race in which polls are tighter than any presidential matchup in recent memory. Vice President Kamala Harris is closing her case with a focus on Trump, much like the two Democratic candidates before her, as well as on abortion rights, with striking comments from Michelle Obama last night that we'll get to in a minute. Former President Donald Trump has a darker closing argument, calling the United States of America a garbage can and belittling the intelligence of the Democratic nominee as his campaign confronts concerns by former top Trump aides about what Trump might do in a second term. So we went to Erie, Pennsylvania to ask Trump running mate Senator JD Vance of Ohio about this.
And so, yeah, even though he didn't say it directly, he does say it directly when he's talking to JD Vance. And I actually have, that's one of my 2 JD Vance clips. That'll be clip 15. Of JD Vance talking about the fascism stuff. But I want to show Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham first before I get to the 2 JD Vance clips. And not only did I pre-criticize that clip, I think I talked about that clip for like at least twice as long as the clip was. Like, can you even, that was like way too long. Well, I went off on a tangent, but I don't know which of the news summaries you think was best. I think that Kristen Welker did the best summary of the whole John Kelley textbook definition of fascism issue, because they actually played the whole audio. I don't know why no one else played the whole audio. We've been waiting so long for to hear John Kelley say the thing in his own words that has been reported on in the past, but he would never like say it on camera, and this is the closest we got. And it's an important, John Kelley is not someone who I agree. Some of the things that he did in the Department of Homeland Security, he started the whole family separation thing, though that wasn't, and as chief of staff, there are a lot of things I don't like about John Kelley, but he doesn't seem like the kind of person who would like make up the story. But you're going to see Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, and JD Vance all try to come up with reasons why he did make it up as a story. Starting with Marco Rubio, who you'll see here. I showed you the news summary from Fox News Sunday where they never mentioned the John Kelley comments. And here Shannon Bream asked Marco Rubio about Trump, about Kamala Harris calling Trump a fascist, and then sort of like briefly mention, and some of his former official or some of his former cabinet people or whatever she says also say that, but doesn't really explain what the basis for the whole fascism charge is based on, not the whole audio recording from General John Kelley. But she does finally mention John Kelley and Mark Milley in her follow-up to Marco Rubio. Are they lying? And yes, he says they are lying, and you'll hear why. And it's still fairly soft. This is kind of a soft way to introduce the topic to the Fox News viewers, I guess, over here.
Let's start here. The vice president is making her closing argument, and she's talking about President Trump as a threat to the country. Here's a little bit what she said in recent days.
Let me ask you tonight, do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. He does not want a military that is loyal to the United States Constitution. He wants a military that is loyal to him. I believe Donald Trump is a danger to the well-being and security of America.
She says those aren't just her words. They're also coming from people who worked very closely with the president. Senator?
Well, first of all, anytime a candidate starts talking, she sounds just like Joe Biden. I mean, literally, she's right back to being Joe Biden. She's using the exact same rhetoric that didn't work for him, the same attacks they've been using against Trump now for like 8 years. No one believes these things. You talk about people that work for the president. No, look, these are people that worked in the administration or around the administration, and then they figured out pretty quickly, if we want jobs after we leave this administration, we have to become anti-Trumpers. You think Mark Milley winds up on the board, teaching at Princeton, teaching at Georgetown, on the Speaker's Bureau, advising J.P. Morgan? You don't get hired for those jobs unless you pronounce yourself anti-Trump and say things against Trump. So you have to go out and say these sorts of things in order to be able to be employable, because corporate America and all these other interests won't hire you if you used to work for or around Trump. I look at the stuff about General Kelley that the Democrats, like I remember Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker called him corrupt. Pelosi launched an investigation into him. They said all kinds of horrible things about him when he worked for Donald Trump. So how do you cleanse yourself of that and allow yourself to become employable and viable in the business world after you leave government service? You have to become anti-Trump. So there's a financial incentive here for these people when they come out and say these things. And my last point that I want to make about this is how interesting that these claims that were made this week pop up with a week and a half to go before the election. If you, in fact, believed, as some of these people claim, that Donald Trump is all these horrible things, Nazi, fascist, all these crazy terms they throw around, why didn't you stand up and walk out of that White House or that administration the moment you heard those terms? Why didn't you say that at the time and not wait till after the fact? Those are questions they're never going to get asked, because this is entirely a political hit job where these people are trying to elevate themselves to become more employable and be able to make more money. And it's also timed perfectly so that they can ask her about it on CNN and she can make the answer that she made. So she's not focused on her record or her plans, because they're just like Joe Biden's and they're full of failure.
Do you think people like General Milley, like John Kelley, are lying?
Yes, I do. And not more, but even if they aren't lying, or even let's say you don't want to call them a liar, I would say it's very dubious to see these accusations coming at the very last minute, right before an election. These are the kinds of things, if somebody says that in front of me, I say it right away. I walk out, I resign, I leave. They didn't do any of those things. And I think it's hypocritical to see a bunch of Democrats who spent months, weeks, trashing these people, particularly in the case of John Kelley, trashing him, saying that he was corrupt, that they accused him of potentially being a Nazi at one point, I remember. They attacked him over some Civil War comments that he made. They were horrible to him. So all of a sudden now, these people, this guy who they hated and said horrible things about, now he is the standard of proof here. Here he is the absolute final word on these topics. I just think anything like this that's coming out at the last minute, being strategically planted, is nothing but an effort to have an impact on this election. Because what Kamala Harris is not going to talk about is the fact that for 4 years, she's been the vice president of potentially, if not the single worst administration for this country and for Americans in my lifetime.
All right, I want to talk about the fact that part of their argument against him is they say he's too friendly with autocrats.
And then she goes on, not to talk about the Hitler comments, but about contacts with Vladimir Putin and whether Trump is tough enough on Putin. But that was not a very good cross-examination by Shannon Bream. And in fact, well, because you saw the whole news summary where they never reported on what John Kelley or Mark Milley said. And then even in Shannon Bream's question, they cut it, all the clips of Kamala Harris. So this is something Kamala Harris is saying, and this is something she's claiming people who work closely with Trump also said, but they never report on the audio that the New York Times obtained from John Kelley that you saw NBC News report that never made it anywhere onto Fox News Sunday. And her follow-up, are they lying? When he just said they were lying, no, I mean, Marco Rubio's, they're doing it for money, so they'll be employable, I guess, because of cancel culture. Like, how old is John Kelley? He's like a retired 4-star general with, a gold star. He lost his son in war, and that it seems kind of unlikely, but I don't know. You can let me know what you think in the comment section about Marco Rubio's reasoning for why they're lying. Now, you're going to hear the same kind of attempt to rehabilitate Trump from his former chief of staff and several other top officials saying he, praised Hitler and that he is a textbook definition of a fascist. Now you're going to see Lindsey Graham try to make the same kind of, even if they're not lying. You saw Marco Rubio say, and you'll see here that Lindsey Graham tries to say nice things about the generals, and Jonathan Karl's all ready to cross-examine him. And you said so many nice things about these generals in the past, but my favorite part of this, and I'm pre-criticizing the clip, but Lindsey Graham goes after the generals because they didn't win the wars in the Middle East, that Lindsey Graham was the one who was so sure we were going to win and wanted to be the, he was such a big war hawk, and now he's blaming the generals for those wars being failures. That's the richest part of Lindsey Graham's defense of Trump being called fascist over here.
We had this extraordinary event this week. John Kelley, who of course
I heard that.
was his Secretary of Homeland Security, his chief of staff, longest serving chief of staff, saying that he's a textbook definition of a fascist, that he wants to be a dictator, and he said a lot more than that.
He has, and he lost his son in Iraq, General Kelley. I know him. I've had a good relationship with him, but he's undermining a concept that's been good for America, I think. Our generals have sort of been apolitical. He's entitled to his opinion. I just categorically reject it. 3 weeks before the election, you're calling basically Trump Hitler, a fascist, is not going to resonate. What happened to joy on the Democratic side? They went from joy to now Trump is Hitler. That's desperation. As to General Kelley, I would say that the state of Israel, Donald Trump is the most popular politician from the West because he stood by the state of Israel. Hitler wanted to kill all the Jews. President Trump has been a friend of Israel unlike any other. So no wars on his watch. The border was secure. Inflation was down. Mortgage rates were below 3% when President Trump was president. Now they've over doubled. I think General Kelley's criticisms are not based on facts. I think it's emotional, it's sad, and it's not going to matter.
But, well, first of all, obviously, Kelley's not alone in saying that. We heard General Milley, who Donald Trump made the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying he's fascist to the core. And it's not, so let's put aside the word fascist for a second. Kelley also said that Donald Trump disparaged those American heroes who died for our country as losers.
So here's
and it wasn't, he's not saying he's Hitler, but that he repeatedly said Hitler did good things.
So here's what I would say to America.
I mean, did he make it up? I mean, I'm asking him. I mean, you know Kelley.
President Trump denied that he said that, but let's look at the record rather than the rhetoric. Nobody rebuilt the military stronger than Donald Trump, except maybe Ronald Reagan. Nobody, I've seen him. Listen, I've had a lot of interaction with him, so I categorically reject the idea that he has anything but admiration for those who serve and sacrifice. I have seen him interact with the military. So this idea he's hostile to those who serve is not borne out. When he was president, America was strong. The military had what they needed. We went after our enemies. People were afraid of America. Since Biden-Harris has been, since they've been in charge, everything's gone to crap. It's all broken. We had a secure border. Now it's broken. We had no wars. Now the whole world's on fire. Mortgage rates have doubled. We're on the wrong track. With all due respect to these generals, America is ready to move differently, and Donald Trump is the best hope to put out the fires in the world, to end the war in Ukraine, to bring about peace in the Mideast, to restore a broken border and get the economy humming. He did it once. He can do it again. She had a chance. She failed.
But again, it's not just generals. I mean, it's Kelley, chief of staff, Mattis, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Jim Mattis, obviously another four-star, who was chosen to be the Secretary of Defense. This is not a minor position. And he said this of Donald Trump: his use of the presidency to destroy trust in our election and to poison our respect for fellow citizens has been enabled by pseudo-political leaders whose names will live in infamy as profiles in cowardice. Now, General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, is somebody you called a role model for the concept of duty, honor, and country. Can you really dismiss?
Now he's weighed in politically. He has every right to his opinion. But to General Mattis, I think you're rewriting history here because for some reason, I don't know what that reason is, you're not going to be able to change what President Trump did. He killed Soleimani. He put Iran in a box. He put Israel in the strongest position they've been in. He rebuilt our military. Russia didn't invade Ukraine. The border was the most secure in the last 40 years. Inflation was down. Mortgage rates were half of where they are today. He did all of that. He did that. He was a strong leader on the things that matter the most. Whether you like him or not, that's up to you. He's not a fascist. He's not Hitler. And that shows you how desperate this campaign is. You got 3 retired generals who've been out of the game for a while, 3 weeks before the election, trying to replace joy with fear. And let me say one thing to these generals. I admire you. I respect you. But for 20 years, you were given, and others, billions of dollars to train the Iraqi and the Afghan army, and they folded like a cheap suit. How about a little self-reflection about the job you did before you criticize others?
Yeah, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, but that was pretty good questioning from Jonathan Karl, especially the quote from Jim Mattis that was basically calling Lindsey Graham a coward. I think you could kind of see it on his face that he recognized he was being called a pseudo-leader coward in that quote, that it was directed at him. And I think that's why you got that lashing out at the generals who were like, who he's blaming for the wars he was in favor of that were a bad idea to begin with. And even Trump himself is against all those George W. Bush era wars, the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Even Trump says they were huge mistakes, but Lindsey Graham is now blaming it on the generals when he was like the big war hawk, or, well, whatever. I'm repeating what I said before the clip, but I found that clip amusing. I've got 2 JD Vance clips for you. I think it's very similar opening question from both Kristen Welker on Meet the Press and Jake Tapper on State of the Union. I think Jake Tapper does a better cross-examination. It's basically like, why shouldn't we believe the 4-star general who's saying that Trump is a fascist, starting with NBC News Meet the Press over here.
We've heard here in the U.S. this week, Donald Trump's longest-serving chief of staff, General John Kelley, said Donald Trump is a fascist. He echoed comments made by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, who also called him a fascist. When 2 4-star generals who worked so closely with Donald Trump call him a fascist, why shouldn't voters believe them, Senator?
Well, I think that Mark Milley and John Kelley are both disgruntled former employees, and very many of the things that they accused Donald Trump of, people who were in the room at the time some of those comments were made, they have said explicitly Donald Trump didn't say the things that he was accused of. And look, Donald Trump was already president for 4 years. If he was what John Kelley said he was, then why did Donald Trump deliver peace and prosperity? He didn't arrest his political opponents, as Kamala Harris and her Department of Justice have in fact done. He didn't do the
there's no evidence of that, Senator, that Kamala Harris has arrested their political opponents.
The Department of Justice has not been going after political opponents.
Senator, there's no evidence of that.
The current Department of Justice, under the leadership of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, has absolutely been going after the political opponents of the current Democratic Party. I think that's a disgrace, but it's happening.
There's no evidence that the DOJ is going after their political opponents. Donald Trump was indicted by federal grand juries. Let me ask you, though, you said that they're disgruntled employees. Trump praised both Kelley and Milley. In fact, he said Kelley was, quote, one of the best people I've ever worked with. In addition to those 2 Trump's national security advisors, 2 defense secretaries, even his vice president, all say he's unfit to be president. Why should the American people hire Donald Trump when the people who worked most closely with him say that he's unfit to serve.
The people who worked most closely with him, most of them are supporting this ticket. You mentioned one person, two people, a disgruntled ex-employee, Kristen, who Donald Trump fired. He said something nice about him, and then he fired him, and now that person's attacking Donald Trump. But I think this is important because I think the American media has to be honest. Why is it, Kristen, that John Kelley doesn't like Donald Trump? It's not about personality. It's about policy. And I think the American people have the right to know that Donald Trump rejected the John Kelley, the Mark Milley consensus that America should be the policeman of the world. And because of that, these folks hate him. If Donald Trump wanted to start a nuclear war with Russia, I guarantee you that John Kelley and Liz Cheney would be at the front of the line endorsing him. But I think the media misses something really important. This disagreement is not about personalities. This disagreement is because John Kelley didn't like the peace through strength policy of Donald Trump. I do, and I think the American people do.
He was the longest-serving chief of staff, and Donald Trump says he only hires the best people. I got to keep moving, though.
She had to keep moving on to another subject, so did she push back on the whole idea that the Kamala Harris Department of Justice was going after Trump and not these special counsels who were, Jack Smith was supposedly the reason the whole Florida case was dismissed was because he didn't have enough supervision by the Department of Justice. That was the argument so he's not, which made him not an employee of the Department of Justice. That's the whole Trump argument that won in Florida, though, will probably get overturned because he is supervised, but with at arm's length and supposedly independent. And, if the Department of Justice is going after Biden and Harris's political enemies, why did they go after Hunter Biden? Because that's also another special counsel and whatever. So Kristen Welker did push back on that, but didn't really push back on they're warmongers who wanted nuclear war with Russia, and that's why they don't like Donald Trump. That's why they're lying. Not really any pushback on that. I think Jake Tapper did a better job of pushing back on this new argument from JD Vance that it's a policy disagreement. That's what this is about. It's not about personality. It's about policy because, they want to be the world's policeman and start a nuclear war. And Donald Trump just loves peace. They're calling him a fascist because he loves peace. That's the JD Vance argument that you'll hear cross-examined a little better, but also more fully made in this clip.
Let me ask you, obviously, Trump's former chief of staff, General John Kelley, was alarmed, he says, by what he heard when Trump said he wanted to use the National Guard or the Pentagon to go after the enemy within, Americans with whom he disagrees, including the Pelosi's, Adam Schiff. And then he gave an interview. He said that Trump, quote, certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, that he is, quote, certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. You've called him a disgruntled former employee. But why shouldn't Americans out there listen to somebody who worked closely with Trump, worked with him longer than you've worked with him, retired four-star Marine general, served his country honorably, who is conservative, who says he agrees with Trump on most policies, but is worried about this aspect of Trump?
So let me say two things in response. So first of all, a lot of what John Kelley, pretty much all of what John Kelley accuses Donald Trump of saying, there were other people in the room, Mike Pence's former chief of staff, for example, who've explicitly said Donald Trump never said those things, right? So one, on
Mike Pence, the
specific
guy
comments,
who's not going to support Trump because
Mike Pence's former chief of staff said that Donald Trump didn't say those things, right? So that's number one. Number two, I actually think there's an interesting conversation here to have, Jake, which is why does John Kelley not support Donald Trump? It's about policy. It's actually not about personality.
He says he agrees with Trump on most policy.
No.
He agrees with Trump on most policy. He disagrees with Trump on how Trump views his role and his and the fascism and the authoritarianism.
I don't buy that, Jake. I don't buy that because if you actually look at John Kelley, at folks like Liz Cheney, the fundamental disagreement they have with Donald Trump is even though they say that they're conservative in the sense that they want America to get involved in a ton of ridiculous military conflicts. They want America to police the world, and Donald Trump wasn't.
John Kelley lost a son in Afghanistan. Why are you saying that he? I've never heard John Kelley say whether
Jake,
he supports of Iraq or Afghanistan.
And I honor his son's sacrifice, and I honor his family's sacrifice. That doesn't mean he's not wrong about policy.
What specifically are you talking about? What has he said that
is your argument that a person who lost a son in Afghanistan can't be wrong about public policy?
I'm asking
then
you.
Why bring that up? Let's talk about public policy. Because I've never criticized his service or his son's service.
I brought it up because you're acting as if he is pro-war, and I've never heard him say whether or not he supported the war in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq. He was a general carrying out orders.
Because I know John Kelly's worldview, and I know the people who have attacked Donald Trump the most vociferously on foreign policy. They'll say, well, he's a dictator, when what they really mean is they won't listen. Donald Trump wouldn't listen to the leadership of the military when they wanted him to start ridiculous conflicts. That is a consistent theme. And I think that there's a big, big thing going on in American politics. It's a very interesting theme in American foreign policy, where a lot of former members of the Pentagon bureaucracy, a lot of old neoconservatives, they have a fundamental difference with Donald Trump on the question of peace and war. I believe Donald Trump is the candidate of peace. I think the record supports that. But the reason these guys go after him so vociferously, I don't think that it's about his personality, Jake. I think that it's about they don't like that Donald Trump said no when a lot of them wanted to start a ridiculous war.
Well, you're ascribing worldviews, I think, based on gut. I can't really tell where you're coming from on it. There's no evidence.
Based on people that I've talked to in the Trump administration,
John
about
Bolton,
what John Kelly wanted to do, John Bolton, Liz Cheney. These people have a consistent.
John Kelly was at the Department of Homeland Security, and then he was chief of staff. He was not weighing in. I don't even know what you're talking about. But let me ask you something about John Kelly specifically, because you said the other day, quote, I guarantee John Kelly talked to somebody on Kamala Harris's campaign beforehand, before he did this interview. Now, I've spoken with people in John Kelly's circle, and I've spoken with people in the Kamala Harris campaign. They say there's been no communication the entire time. So where did that come from?
Oh, I'm highly skeptical of that, Jake. You know the way that these attacks work. You know the way that these people are often vetted by a campaign.
So you made it up.
So you made it up, which was basically what Jake Tapper showed in the previous set of questioning about. So where are you coming with this idea that John Kelly specifically is pro-war? You know, he was a general carrying out orders. He lost a son in a conflict that might not make you pro-war, and he never really the whole reason we haven't heard from John Kelly up until now is because he has this idea that generals should be non-political and shouldn't talk about political matter. And so the idea that somehow JD Vance, the only reason JD Vance knows or thinks he knows what John Kelly's views are is because it fits the argument he wants to make, that they're all like pro-war, you know, they're all warmongers, and Trump is a man of peace, and so they can't take that he wouldn't let them start wars, and so they're calling him a fascist. That's basically JD Vance's argument. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but you can tell me what you think in the comment section. I think that Jake Tapper did a better job of cross-examining him on that particular question. And you saw in both the last two clips that JD Vance kept bringing up Liz Cheney, like for no reason, just because she's a well-known neocon, I guess. And even the CNN Chiron there, the lower third text, said something about JD Vance rips John Kelly, Liz Cheney, something like that. And Liz Cheney was on Face the Nation after JD Vance did a similar kind of attack on her. But I actually really like this question. The question itself is kind of amusing. The first question that Liz Cheney is asked on Face the Nation here is a follow-up from having just watched the JD Vance having just watched the JD Vance interview. The question is, he responded to your characterization of him as a misogynistic pig by attacking your father and his role in the Iraq War. Donald Trump has also done so. Do you care to respond? So yeah, he responded to your characterization of him as a misogynistic pig. That's the part that I had to look up because I really like that. But you're going to hear it now and see Liz Cheney, I think, make a really good response to what you just heard from JD Vance just much more briefly. And the final newsmaker clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
I have a number of questions for you, but I do want to start where I left off with Senator Vance. He responded to your characterization of him as a misogynistic pig by attacking your father and his role in the Iraq War. Donald Trump has also done so. Do you care to respond?
Look, I think that they are doing everything they can to try to distract from the fact that the people who know Donald Trump best, including retired four-star Marine General John Kelley, who is a Gold Star father, have come out and said very clearly and very directly to the American people that Donald Trump is not fit. That Donald Trump himself, standing near the graves of our fallen service members, says things like they're suckers and losers. We all watched on January 6th when Donald Trump sat in the dining room next to the Oval Office for hours, and watched people with his flags and his name, a mob he had sent to the Capitol. He watched them brutally beat police officers and invade our Capitol. His own vice president's not voting for him. His chiefs of staff aren't voting for him. Secretaries of Defense, National Security Advisor. So, you know, this is completely unprecedented. I don't think, certainly in my lifetime, probably in American history, have you had a situation where so many of the top officials of the former president are saying they won't vote for him. Yeah. And I think, you know, we're going to hear continued assaults and rhetoric from Donald Trump and JD Vance to try to cover that up. But at the end of the day, it's desperation. The American people are much smarter than that, and they see through it, I'm confident.
So, yeah, that is the final clip, and sometimes Liz Cheney says things that are true, but she's also using several other Republicans to back her up. I hope that there are enough Republicans who switch sides to make up for the 8% of the 49% of people who think Trump is fascist who are going to vote for him because he's fascist. I mean, that is... I guess it's a topsy-turvy world with all new political coalitions, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed the time and effort I put into picking out all these clips and adding my media criticism and political commentary. I will be back next Monday and every Monday all the way through January 20th, 2025, when we find out if the person elected in November is the same person who's inaugurated in January. Who knows? Who knows how it's all going to turn out? But I did promise that I had a bonus Cheech and Chong, the Cats clip. They're right over here to my right. They were like up there. I finally got them out of the way of the camera. But this is 2 clips I spliced together to show how they react differently to a toy mouse. Cheech really liked this toy mouse. Chong didn't really care over here. So yeah, that's the bonus Cheech and Chong, the Cats clip for the week. Cheech and Chong will be back next week with me to talk about this. That'll be the day before the actual election. I only have one more show before the election, although who knows if 2 weeks from now if we will know who won or not. Hopefully 2 weeks from now we'll know, but that's the big suspense. We gotta wait, but I'll see you next Monday and we'll talk about how things are going right before the big day. And until then, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.